Hey guys, Sfrums here, and I'm just going to be playing some 10-minute games, and until I get a game, I'll just watch stronger players play. Looks like Black's playing h6 here to boot the bishop. The bishop comes back. Oh, Black's really breaking up his king side in order to push this bishop away. He centralizes his knight, hoping that probably knight takes knight, then c takes knight, creating this nice long pawn chain. Uh, Alright, we got a game. I think I'll Fiend Shadow first here, and then play d6. Oh, when they play f4 here, they're going for a humongous center. But I'm fine playing knight f6 if he plays knight c3. I don't know how good it is now. I think it'll be fine. I hope he plays knight c3 here. I know some of the lines in the Austrian attack and the perk, which is where they get all these pawns in. But he is not playing the main line move. So he has this kind of odd way of doing it where he doesn't have a knight on c3. Maybe he'll play c3 or c4. I could break with d5, but I've already played d6, and that's kind of wasting a move. So c5 is an idea. Knight f d7, then e5 is something to think about. But I'll go with something like c5 because it gives my bishop on g7 a reason for being there, cutting across the entire board, maybe one day aiming at this a1 rook. I wouldn't be surprised to see something like e5. I would have to decide between dropping my knight back to e8 or d7. Moving it to h5 might actually lose it to g4 very soon after, maybe not right away, but he can look at things like h3, g4, and it's just my knight gets pretty uncomfortably placed on the side of the board. But he chose not to. He chose to just push his d pawn to d5. And I think one idea might be playing b5 here. If bishop takes, I just take e4. If e5, then I can play knight takes d5. And then he might play bishop e4 there, and then my knight is really pinned. So I can't quite play b5 yet. But what about c4? Bishop takes c4 and knight takes e4. That's looking pretty good. You know what? b5 would have been fine if he took also, because I'll have threats of queen b6 later. But I like c4, because now my queen can come to b6 with check, but I will just be taking e4 if I get the chance. I don't see what else he does. Maybe he does play e5 here, but what I take, he takes. I might take c2 in that spot. Seems like I'll be winning quite a few pawns. So I expect bishop takes c4, and then I play knight takes e4, and I have a really nicely centralized knight. My bishop on c8 then could come to f5 or g4. His bishop on c4 is prone to my attacks like pawn to b5 and queen to b6 check. So he can't take b5. It's looking good. Okay, he did go with e5. I don't think knight d5 is what I want to do. I think I just want to take d3. He takes f6. I take c2. He plays queen takes c2, and I play bishop takes f6. And I win a pawn in that. And my bishop's coming to f5 to attack his queen and get into the game. Now, is there any reason to take it right now? Bishop takes f6 here. Or would I rather, so c2, queen c2, bishop f6, or bishop f6, queen d3, bishop f5. No, I think I'd rather have this pawn on d5 isolated, so it gives me a target to attack later. I bet I can pick it up later. So by taking c2, I make it hard for him to support this d5 pawn. I really can't imagine him playing anything other than queen takes c2 here. If he plays pawn takes g7, I get his queen. If he plays pawn takes e7, I take his queen. He takes my rook at best. He takes my queen, then I take his rook check, and then his pawn. So he's losing a lot of material there. He really has to take c2. And then I'm going to play bishop takes f6. With bishop f5 really coming up pretty soon, I think. My knight goes to d7 and c5 here. That's one plan, or knight a6, knight c7, putting pressure on d5. Or even knight a6, knight b4. Maybe hopping into c2 later. So first I'll just get my bishop out like I was talking about earlier. And now his queen is coming in. Maybe queen b6 first was an idea I should have thought about. But again, because I don't have a knight to give him to g4, and then f2, I wasn't really thinking about it. But last move, queen b6 check, and then bishop f5 would have been an interesting idea. But that's okay. I can always play queen d7 to defend this pawn. Knight a6, queen b7, knight c5 is an option. I forget that I'm playing 10 minutes right now, so I have some time to think. I could play queen b6 check now and double my pawns up, and then these two bishops would be pretty cutthroat against his position. And this rook goes down on a2. So I think I'm happy with the queen trade here, even though it doubles my pawns. I know he's probably going to play bishop e3, attacking my b6 pawn, but my knight was coming to d7, then c5 anyway. And this d5 pawn is definitely a target. Bishop e4 will win this pawn very soon if I get rid of this knight. Let's say bishop c3, c3. I don't really want that to happen because I'm worried about his knight or his pawn coming up to c4 and defending it better. I expect something like knight to d4 here. In which case I will probably be moving my light squared bishop away from his knight. I don't want to just take his knight on d4. The bishop pair is pretty critical to my advantage. I am up a pawn though, but I do like the bishop pair. You know, if I can trade a lot of pieces off, that would be good. I'd be willing to give up the bishop pair in that situation. Alright, so he did what we expected. I'll attack his rook and kind of reroute my bishop onto this a6 f1 diagonal. So bishop c4 is one idea. I don't want it to get trapped or anything. I'm a little concerned about that, but not so concerned I'm not going to do it. b3 almost invokes a weakness on this diagonal here. Excuse me. So I expect b3, bishop a6, b4, then my bishop would come back to c4. On a move like knight b5, it looks a little scary, but my rook isn't even on e8, so a knight hopping into c7 doesn't win anything. If he moves this knight, though, I will be taking d5 most likely. My rook on f8 is going to c8. My bishop and rook are both aiming at a2, and it'd be nice to get some pressure on the c3 knight in addition to this bishop. Interesting. So I guess he's either breaking with b4, which he could have done anyway, or he's really scared of losing that pawn. He's looking to play rook c1 and didn't want to lose that pawn. So is there any way I can take advantage of the a2 pawn moving? Well, if I play knight c5, maybe my knight can hop to b3. Yeah, I don't see why not. Knight c5, b4, knight b3, bishop b3. This knight's on the under attack, and so is the bishop. Something like rook c1 maybe, then rook c8. I do have to watch this b6 pawn, but I'm not going to play this scared or anything. My knight can always hop back to d7. Knight a4, if it were my turn here, wouldn't be that good, because knight a4, knight takes a4, rook takes a4. Maybe b3, but then actually bishop takes d4. It's an immediate threat he has to deal with, because I'm threatening bishop takes e3 check. So that's just a weird little sideline that I did not expect happening. If it's my move, bishop takes d4, knight b3. Or bishop takes d4, rook takes d4, knight b3, rook c4, knight a1. And I think my knight is getting out in that line, either to b3 or c2. So on my move, bishop d4, knight b3, he moves this rook, let's say, to b1, then I take. His pieces are pretty centralized, though. I'd rather keep the bishop pair than go into that. I'm much more interested in something like rook c8 or knight b3. So he's really taking his time on this move. He does have 4 minutes left, so it's almost like he just started a 5-minute game in this position, which is nice. I actually prefer the 10-minute games. The 5-minute games I feel rushed, and I get tired more easily just because I'm thinking at a faster rate. Here I can really work through some variations and take a little more time on things, and I don't get so many blitz rushes. Okay, so his knight does retreat to f3. Not exactly sure why. Maybe he's hoping for something like b4. He's scared of trading after knight b3. I'm considering bishop b3 here, making it so he can't play b4 right away. This also opens up my rook to come to c8 and put pressure on his c3 pawn, or c3 knight, and it also puts a question to his rook. And his rook can't go to d3, threatening my bishop, because my knight's guarding d3. Also, if I play bishop c3, bc3, this a3 pawn's pretty weak. My knight's happy here on c5. I would love if he would just take it and b takes. More likely he'll play something like bishop d4, getting his bishop more active. Bishop c3, bc3, knight e4, rook d3. I'm not seeing the follow-up there. Rook c8. Let's say something like bishop d4. Bishop c2 maybe. Okay, that's an idea. Bishop c3, bc3, knight e4 is hitting his pawn and rook. Now he could just play rook b2, and that gets his rook all the way lined up with my bishop and pawn. But in that case, I would take d5. You know, I think his rook has a lot to defend in this situation. I may not be taking c3, but now a3 is really weak. And getting the move b5 in would be pretty convenient for me. I have to be scared, though, of knight c3, rook d3, rook c8. But then if he plays rook c1, I have something like knight e2 check, winning the rook. So it should work out for me. I definitely like the queens on more than queens off. I've always been that kind of player. I remember I learned from a chess coach once who would just trade queens off like on move 10 in a lot of his openings, or maybe move 12 or 13. He just had a lot of openings that uh, created open lines for queens to get traded, and I just never liked playing that way. I much preferred keeping the queens on. But with this type of position, where my knight and bishop are so dynamic together, I don't mind it too much. It's the really grinding down end games where you need perfect play, where I get burnt out and bored. But this is kind of fun, actually. So rook c8 is one idea I'm looking at. I would play bishop c4, but then rook d4. So what about bishop c2? Rook d4 and knight c3. Rook c4, rook c8. Bishop c4. Sorry, bishop c2. Rook d4 is his only move to hold the rook. Knight c3 is threatening knight e2. Rook c1, gets him knight e2'd. So bishop c2. So he has to come to d4. I mean, I can't play e5 here, but it's a cool idea. Alright, rook c1 allows the knight e2 forking all of his pieces. So this is working out so far. I'm curious to see how he generates counterplay, if he's going to be able to. He's down a significant amount of time at this point. Over a minute. Okay, so he wants to attack my bishop. Well, I think I'll threaten taking his knight here, because that would double his pawns up. I expect some sort of bishop takes b6, undoubling my pawns. That's fine, because now I can get away with taking d5, threatening taking the bishop, and I really do want to take that knight. I don't know if it's worth it. I know f4 is going to be hanging after this. I probably could have just left that on, but this is so, I'm up so many pawns. It's 6 pawns to 3. It's going to be hard for me to lose this position unless I make a pretty massive mistake. Just simplifying with the trade seems decent. e5, then d5. Or just getting my rooks to the open files. Oh wow, okay. My rooks can come to a6 and c6 if I need to support this d6 pawn. And I can play f6 and d5 too. I don't really want to get my rook trapped on d8 because the bishop takes e5. Rook a6 also keeps pressure on his a3 pawn. And my knight on f4 is in a nice spot. d5, d4 would lock his bishop out. But he could take d4 in that case. I should watch out for that. No, because then I play knight h5 check. So if I get my pawn to d4, I can do that. Now if he plays king e3, I don't know if I should get my pawn to d4. Bishop takes, pawn takes, king takes f4. I'll probably play rook b6 first, then rook b3 check. Oh, I can do it now though. Because takes, knight h5 check is the in-between move. So he's just moving his king back and forth, right? How do I want to break through? Well, now I can use my rooks to double up and get to c2 and just keep trading things off. Why not? My rooks are really working together, and his are stuck here just hoping I don't promote. Alright, that was a 10-minute game I just played on chess.com. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.